It's a dark day in the history of South Africa. The black you see on your screen is in protest of ANC7's voice of being muzzled by MultiChoice. MultiChoice has decided not to renew its contract with ANC7 despite an internal investigation finding no wrongdoing on the part of the channel. ANC7 will continue to protest in a bid to protect our freedom of speech and our constitutional right to exist.
I think it's outrageous that MultiChoice, a monopoly capitalist company with very deep roots in the old apartheid bastion and attitude, would make such a decision in our democracy. When you listen to the MultiChoice CEO speaking, he is at pains to say there were mistakes made in the dealings, but no corruption, etc., etc. So what is the problem here exactly? I think what MultiChoice is doing is they are removing diversity from the platform of news in our country. What is even more disappointing is the statement made by our Minister of Communications, who is disappointed, yes, but says MultiChoice will bring in a new black partner to start a new platform. So, one must ask the question, the black partner that is ANC7 right now is probably not a good enough black partner.
The report very, very clearly states that they did not find anything adverse. They found there was no corruption. They found that any monies that were paid were legitimate, that they were entitled to do that. So it is very strange for me that having that finding, such findings, you still want to say you don't want to renew the contract. You don't even take into consideration the number of people that will be losing their jobs, the coverage that we've been getting from ANC7 in the last year, I think. ANC7 has uncovered so much that we, even as politicians, members of parliament, did not even know ourselves. Now, with all that is happening, I cannot understand the decision that has been taken by MultiChoice.
As COSATU, we have noted this decision, and for us, really, whether it's a political decision or a business decision, it makes very little difference in the sense that the implications are likely to be dire for workers, and that is really where our concerns are. For us, we think that the loss of this contract will result in ANC7 having to revisit its operations, and we are fearful that there is a strong possibility that it might not be able to keep all of its workers at a time when we are trying to kickstart the economy and make sure that we put a moratorium on job losses. This is not really what we need in the country.
We are still going through that statement by MultiChoice. We believe that we need to interrogate it further because, as you've mentioned, that they're saying that they could not find any corrupt dealings in terms of the dealings between government and the owners of ANC7. We need to see what are the implications of this in terms of media freedom and diversity, because it could also set a very dangerous precedent. We are basically saying that, our first thoughts at this stage are really with the journalists and what this means for them, especially because they had nothing to do with the dealings and decisions of the corporate arm of the company. We really do hope that the decisions they took was not influenced by any of the latest political developments or any business interests, because media freedom has to be sacrosanct. The rights of journalists to do their work have to be protected. We have to continue to strive for a diversified industry because we need the different platforms, different media houses to be owned by different people, and also those platforms to provide variety of views. So we are quite concerned, and we are hoping that we will get further clarity from the company, considering, as you said, that they said that there was no corruption, but what they're calling mistakes.
First, we have to engage them. If they don't obviously listen to us, we'll have to look into further other actions. I don't rule out taking action right into their doorstep, but I think we must also reflect what the public views are. The public views, they obviously rated by the developments in the country, particularly on issues of corruption. This is not an issue here. The issue here is about how do you therefore deal with corruption. It must not be dealt in a manner that you are shifting a buck. If there was corruption, let those who have committed such be brought into books, both at multi-choice and at AN7. AN7 is an institution that can be bought by any business person going forward. So we must be very careful on how we address these matters, because it will be a self-determination if we're not responding to those things effectively.
And joining us for this crucial debate tonight, our former editor-in-chief for The New Age and AN7, Mohsin Williams, and Cecilia Russell, Special Projects Editor, Jackie Shandu, Political Analyst, and Tsepo Khadima, Political Analyst, and Sizwe Pamla Kosatu, Spokesperson, Dylan Chabeleng, Transform RSA President, and Professor Berry Hanyane, Political Analyst and also Professor with the University of the Northwest, Sabelo Sigudu, National Freedom Party Spokesperson, on the phone line. Good evening to all our guests, and thank you so much for joining us. Let's just look at what happened today. I mean, it is, if you look at the democratic constitutional rights and the right of existence, that now AN7 is forced to fight for survival in something that, in my view, is unconstitutional. Tsepo, very briefly, we do have a number of guests and we want to cover as much as possible in this space.
The action or the announcement by MultiChoice today, simply put, is unlawful and unconstitutional. It therefore cannot carry the day. There is no court in this land that can agree. The Constitutional Court already has made a determination that private companies such as MultiChoice, because of the nature of service that they provide, which they do so under legalized monopolistic conditions, they are therefore quasi-organs of state. Now, simply put, the city of Johannesburg, it doesn't matter how much they might hate one resident or the other, they cannot refuse to give that resident water or electricity because those are constitutional obligations. In this instance, the same applies. We must bear in mind, and this is very important to make, MultiChoice, which is a subsidiary of Nationale Pers, founded in 1915, Nationale Pers, which was founded by Barry Hertzog, the same Barry Hertzog who's also the founder of Nationalist Party, and therefore from 1915 they supported wholeheartedly to the hilt Nationalist Party until it won elections in 1948, where it governed under legalized apartheid conditions. And in 1986, the same Nationalist Party government then rewarded very handsomely Nationale Pers with this monopoly of the satellite broadcasting space, which to this day, even the democratic government, and it is lamentable that this democratic government continues to maintain that monopoly. So effectively, MultiChoice has not only violated the Constitution with their purported non-renewal of the contract with AN7, but they have also violated the competition law. So how can we have a corporate body that is a transgressor to this extent of our constitutional freedoms? That cannot be allowed. So Mr. Mzwanele Manyi is not an option. He has a duty to have to go to court to seek redress and relief. All
right, we'll take other views in a bit. Sizwe Pamla Kosatu, spokesperson, on the phone line. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Earlier, we had the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC saying that this is reminiscent of apartheid censorship of media. The minute you're uncomfortable about one voice, you therefore shut it down. What is your view?
Well, indeed, it's difficult for us to believe that this was about business, but it was not political, because there's been a number of people who have been lobbying, including organizations, for AN7 to be shut down, or at least taken out of MultiChoice. From where we stand, we believe that this is a slippery slope. People should have an appreciation that in a democracy, you don't have a right to not be offended. If people felt that the coverage of AN7 or the issues that AN7 has been raising were offensive to them, then that is exactly what the democracy is about, is that some of the views are going to keep you uncomfortable and unsettle you. And we really do believe that this is political. And what is even more sad is the fact that when people are playing at this level where they are playing a political game. They are toying with people's livelihoods because there are workers now whose livelihoods are being compromised. Going forward, we strongly do believe that this actually should be the straw that breaks the camel's back, especially on issues relating to the monopoly that MultiChoice has. We should actually use this to sharply raise this issue and demand action, not just have a debate or never-ending debate. This should be about protecting our democracy, because our democracy actually was about replacing what we felt were things that were intolerable under apartheid. Now that we see people going back to their comfort zone, because the issue of censorship is the comfort zone of people who grew up under apartheid. Who, when they felt that they were offended, they could go out there and demand and lobby that something be done. And unfortunately, they have managed to pull that one off this time around. And we think there is a need to actually push back against this.
All right, so let's get a view from Transform RSA, Adil Nchabeleng, its president, joining us on the phone line. Good evening to you. What do you make of MultiChoice, their slogan being, or mantra, it's so much more? It seems so much less, especially in terms of a choice for viewers. What is your contribution?
Good evening, Cindy, and good evening to the viewers. Look, this decision is something that was really expected. From Transform RSA's point of view, we know the culture of NASTER, we know the culture of MultiChoice, we know the culture of DSTV. It has never been anything to do with respecting black people at all. It has always been an affront that actually protects the interest of a minority, massive strong capital holders, which is a group called NASTER in South Africa, which controls around 20% of the JSE's net capitalization. They are sitting with 2 trillion in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So when they make decisions like this, to them it doesn't really mean much. It just shows you the level of how NASPER, particularly under the subsidiary MultiChoice, regards black-owned companies as well as broadcasters. There is not much more that they are offering. As far as I'm concerned, personally, I can tell you that DSTV's value as well as MultiChoice platform has deteriorated in terms of quality of content as well as TV provision. But unfortunately, we are living in an era whereby the South African government has failed dismally to provide an alternative medium, which should have been a digital terrestrial television today, whereby multitudes of broadcasters could have a platform where they can use in order to stream as well as broadcast their content and television programs. And now we are all hamstrung, and monopoly tendencies that MultiChoice is showing clearly that because they are a market leader and a monopoly in the market, they are using the stranglehold position that they have to actually now subdue as well as kill emerging talented black organizations.
All right, Professor Barry Hanyani also joins us. Adil, I beg your pardon. Good evening to you, Professor. He's also with the University of the Northwest. That what we're dealing here with is, in a sense, hegemony and dominance of one over another. How do you then justify, as we heard from the MultiChoice CEO, saying that there was no wrongdoing found in the transactions and the prepayment made, that this is not irregular, it's been done with other channels, and yet the contract is not being renewed?
Yeah. Cindy, good evening to you. Good evening to your viewers. I think it's a pity that the multitude of voices that have begun to characterize media coverage in this country would, in a sense, have to face this backlash. It's just unfortunate. And I speak, I suppose, on the platform of academia, where academia is not supposed to take sides, but make meaningful academic contributions to issues of society as diverse as they are. We sit here today with a platform that unfortunately would, in a sense, stifle alternative ideological positions, which would undoubtedly begin to enrich the public discourse in terms of providing a critical view and an alternative position on a number of issues that have begun to, in a way, shape up the public debate in this country.
Okay, let's get to Sfiso Mahlango, a group political analyst and editor in ANN7 and TNA. Jackie Shandu, very quickly in your submission that the whole loser in it all is the democracy, is the freedom of choice, is the right to existence as well.
But all those things, good evening, all those things only exist on paper. This so-called progressive constitution, this is a modern-day colony, and it's a colony now by consensus between the incorrigibly corrupt and cowardice political elite of the ANC. They have a social contract with white monopoly capital. That is proving almost impossible to break. This is a sheer use of power, abuse of power. But again, this, by its nature, white power, it is something that defies logic. You can't reason against it. Let me give you maybe 3 brief examples. The President of the United States just unilaterally said they are going to open their embassy in Israel. They are treating now Jerusalem as the capital of when we know what the conditions are. So I'm saying this is how it happens. When George Bush in Iraq, the UN takes a position, this illusion of democracy, I think today, black people must begin to see that you cannot have a democratic dispensation that places you outside of power, particularly economic power, because they are using their unethical relations with the leaders of the ANC who are agents, who are party spies, some of them, who are still towing the line of white domination in South Africa, whereas only there is an 8% settler community of whites in this country. And it's time we spoke boldly and frankly, because we've been talking since 1994, black people are becoming more disempowered, black people are becoming more poorer, and now, even worse, their voice is being silenced.
Yeah. Is this a fight that ought to go into the public space in terms of civic groups, as opposed to it being a political intervention? We've heard from Minister of Communication saying, look, this is between 2 private parties and they're not going to intervene. Cecilia, can we just leave it at that? Or how do we encourage true democracy through diverse voices?
Well, we must look at what diversity of voices mean and diversity of opinion mean. And diversity of voices mean that you don't all that you go out and you fetch voices that are not necessarily popular, or not necessarily popular in the mainstream. You know, in our mainstream media tends to follow a popular narrative, just one narrative. And what we've seen recently is, you know, a kind of clamp down on democratic rights. I mean, we saw a press release the other day, for example, which said that 2 people should be effectively summarily dismissed from Eskom without due process. What on earth is this? This is our democracy that we're supposed to be fighting. The only group that will really take issue with that is ANN7, not because we think that they are necessarily good people, but because we believe that our democratic process was fought for and therefore should be looked after. Diversity of voices also means that you go into the street and you go and find the views of people that are not generally found in the mainstream media. We do that. The ANN7 does it all the time. There are 2 huge programs that they did ahead of the elections, where they went and spoke to people who had never spoken to a television station in their lives. This is the voice that is going to be lost to this country. It's the voice that is bringing the voices of people that are never heard in the media onto our screens. And so, I mean, apart from everything else, I really feel that it's a very, very badly thought out decision.
Yeah, we speak to veteran journalist and a former editor-in-chief for TNA and ANN7, Mohsin Williams. Mr. Williams, thanks so much for joining us. On the one side, MultiChoice says it's truly empowered, that it appreciates diversity and therefore the existence of ANN7. But today we heard a contradiction that, you know, they should have done a better due diligence. They've made mistakes, mishaps in scrutinizing the ownership or the former ownership of the channel, and this is where we are at the moment. I mean, what do you make out of all of this?
Look, want to agree with Jackie, that it's a kind of a classical neoliberal kind of position adopted by multi-choice. What we are aware that they have been under sustained pressure from certain groupings over a period of time who did not like the fact that ANN7 was providing a platform for other voices, other progressive voices. And these people launched petitions, they threatened to cancel subscriptions, etc., etc. So it's a classical neoliberal response by a company that is purely interested in its financial kind of considerations. This is a financial consideration and a position adopted not to upset the kind of establishment kind of media out there and the multi-choice. These are the very same people who say they support our constitution and our democracy, but they fail to understand what it really means to be a liberal in South Africa. And that is, as I saw the deputy SG of the ANC used a quote from a famous philosopher that said that even if you disagree with the opinion of somebody, you will fight to the death to defend their right to say what they want to say. That is real democracy. That is real liberalism. But these people who are out there calling for ANN7 to be shut down, they go under the kind of the banner of being liberal. They're not really liberal. They're neoliberal. They're there purely to promote the interests of capitalists, and they use democracy in order to make more money. And as your panelists are saying, it will be a great, great tragedy if ANN7 is removed from the air, because over the last 5 years it has provided a platform for many, many people who would not have access to media.
Mr. Williams, please stay with us. Siso Mahlangu, Group Political Editor, TNA and ANN7. Good evening to you and thanks for joining us. Collateral damage in the sense that there is this war, of course, against the Guptas and President Zuma, state of capture investigation, and all sorts of things abound, that this is justifiable in the eyes of a multi-choice, reputational damage that they argue, and even commercial loss.
Well, that would be very strange because multi-choice has a variety of programs. Programs supplied by very controversial people, South Africans and non-South Africans. Some news channels, unless somebody wants to suggest to us tonight that the SABC is never been biased and the SABC and other channels are completely objective, yet they keep it on their platform, amongst many other channels. So I don't think that's a fair debate to put ANN7 in to say, because there are allegations about, the Gupta family and President Jacob Zuma, then remove ANN7 from the platform. Another debate that is now lurking on social media is how many people are going to lose jobs at ANN7, and I think that's a fair debate. But that, for me, is a latter debate. I think ANN7 has the right to exist. That is a pivotal right that South Africans fought for, and the right to tell their stories, their black stories, as white people have the right to tell white stories, for example. And I think when you consider the past of the ANC, them fighting for the right to communicate, those newspapers, radio freedom at the time, that is what they fought for, a voice. And I don't think someone can shut down a voice and then say, well, just for jobs, let's just attempt to keep them in office. There is an existing right for freedom of speech enshrined in this constitution, and I think ANN7 must be given that right. The latter debate is how many people's lives are going to be affected. The latter debate is that people have an ability and a desire to think what they want. And for that matter, that should be respected. But to just put it out there and say, well, because they're just allegations against certain people, we'll shut down a channel. There's allegations for many, many people in this country. There's allegations against shareholders of banks. Why don't they shut down banks? Why don't they call a blackout for many of those organizations? People see ANN7 as a new kid on the block who is taking a viewership and a progressive message that many
capitalists cannot stand in this country.
Correct.
And this is a way to fight back.
Yeah.
This is particularly political.
Yeah. Is the recourse the legal route to litigation, Mr. Williams? And I'll come to you in a moment, Tsepo, in the sense that we are casualties of war, if you like, being caught in the crossfires with regards to the previous shareholders, etc., that it is an end to a means, in your view?
Look, I think, my view would be that the new owner of the channel, Mr. Mzwaneli Mani, must take this battle to them. I think there's a competitions commission issue here. There's this anti-competitive behavior by a monopoly. And of course, ultimately, it's a political decision that they've taken. They have succumbed to the pressure from these other people who don't want a progressive platform for progressive people. My worry, of course, and I just saw the statement by the Minister of Communications, which is quite shocking, actually. The falling hook, line, and sinker for their, let me use the word, their bullshit about opening a tender later this year for a new black-owned media company to come onto their platform. First of all, the barriers to entry in putting up a TV channel is enormous. It will cost any new entity hundreds of millions of rands to put a new channel together. Firstly. Secondly, why can't we have an additional number of channels and voices? I mean, the digital migration process is happening, opening up spectrum. What we should be fighting for is media platforms and channels like ANC across the entire media spectrum from left to right. I mean, the Afri Forum must be allowed to have their own channel. That is what Article 16 of our Constitution in spirit is trying to say, that we must have a multiplicity of voices, diversity of voices, so that all the country's people can have access to media. But for the minister to welcome this idea that they're gonna allow a new channel to be formed later this year, I'm actually quite shocked about it. And I mean, the ANC has adopted resolutions on media since 2007. Hopefully now they will understand how these monopolies operate, and they will implement some of those resolutions adopted. But for 10 years, they've done nothing about the resolutions adopted to look at media monopoly like that of MultiChoice and Media 24.
I mean, the same courtesy was afforded to other channels. We know that with ETV, I think their bill was coming up to about 500 million for content, with the question around 25 million to ANC7 as a prepayment. That being explained as not being irregular or untoward. It's the nature of the business. Again, it comes back to what has the channel done to then not be continued on air. Tsepo?
Look, I think maybe let's remind the viewers this, is that every single channel that is broadcast on the DSTV bouquet, all of it, DSTV pays for that content on those channels from the subscriptions that people are paying to MultiChoice or to DSTV. So let's start there. And the question is that what has given rights for DSTV to be the only one that can be able to broadcast? So for example, ANN7 cannot tomorrow go to Intelsat and say, please give me bandwidth to be able to broadcast throughout the country, because the laws do not allow for that, but have effectively entrenched this monopoly. And as I say, this monopoly was given as a direct reward for the support by Naspers of the apartheid regime. And they were rewarded, and today we are still living with that monopoly. But now this is a new constitutional scheme that we work under as a country, and that constitutional scheme makes no allowance whatsoever for the decision as so taken by the board of MultiChoice. However, the message I have for the chairman of the company, Mr. Mzwaneli Mani, is one. This is not a time for a pity party. Because if you make a pity party, very few people are going to come, and those that come will not bring any presents. This is a time to be calm, to be bold, to be decisive. and to ensure that the promissory note that is carried within our constitution is indeed brought to life. And the only forum, the legitimate forum to bring that constitutional promissory note to life is through our courts, because ours is a constitutional democracy and the courts are the ultimate arbiter. And to ensure that the constitution of this republic is brought to life. What is more shocking, however, I have to mention, is to hear our Minister of Communications making the utterances that she has made, because if anything, a minister in the government is supposed to be more knowledgeable in depth about the constitution of the republic. It is unforgivable that you can have a Minister of Communication making such utterances, and thank God she will not be minister by the time this matter is finalized in court.
Okay, Tsepo, I mean, a lot of us, I think, were anticipating that this could happen, in the sense that the voices that were swirling up in calling for ANN7 to be closed. But do you think, Mr. Pamla, it's an overreaction, or DSTV or multi-choice succumbing to the pressures in closing down ANN7, and not necessarily the fact that there is no viewership, for example, that the channel is not growing, that is not creating employment and a different narrative?
Well, this makes the mockery of the notion that ours is a free market system, because in a free market system, you allow the viewers or the buyers to actually punish if there's a need to punish, reward if there's a need to reward. This kind of intervention really, it tells you that there's nothing free market about the system that we currently have, that there is no competition. And now, how do we deal with it going forward? We do what we've always said needs to be done, is to dismantle the monopolies that are actually stopping the transformation from happening. Unfortunately, we've been having this conversation for quite some time. We've got enough resolutions from the ANC to actually do this. The question now is whether this newly elected leadership understands what is at stake and understands what is it that people are calling for. Unfortunately, looking at the experience that we have had over the last couple of years, we've been very disappointed, but we remain hopeful. And we think that what we have seen, not just with the multi-choice issue, across the sectors of the economy, the kind of arrogance that we have seen, we think that at least now people have an appreciation that the people of South Africa are running out of patience, and then the pressure is on to those who have been elected, at least at the highest level, to come out with tangible interventions that are going to make a difference. Especially for us, we want to make this point, especially because we don't have an economy that can afford to actually hemorrhage jobs any further. Anytime we see jobs that are going to get lost, we look at the intervention from government, and so far we were hoping that that intervention was going to come to the minister from the communication, was supposed to come in and look at what about other stakeholders, because the issue of looking at a company through the prism of only shareholders when there are other primary stakeholders, to say if these kinds of decisions are going to be taken, what is going to happen to other people who actually have no dog in that hunt? Because the issue of whether people we ourselves have had issues with ANN7. At some point we voted ANN7 the West employer, because as a trade union we felt that some of the issues that were directed to workers were unfair at the time. We raised those issues because we felt that we had the platform to actually engage with ANN7 and make sure that they actually change some of the things that we didn't like. But if we are going to continue like this, then we might as well say, let's go and find out what is happening in the farming sector and shut down commercial farms that are abusing workers in this country. And let's go to the mining sector and shut down all of the mines that are neglecting issues of health and safety. If really that is the attitude that we are going to adopt, we are in trouble, and we are going to be in trouble going forward.
Yeah. Mr. Pamla, stay with us. Professor Barry Hanyane, you know, Mr. Pamla rather earlier said this is a slippery slope, a dangerous ground and precedents that we're setting. Whilst there are adequate mechanisms to deal with issues that you may find offensive on air. You have the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, the Press Ombuds, SANAF, etc. In your view, is this rather drastic in not renewing the contract for ANN7?
Well, look, Cindy, it's one way to deal with, in a sense, the pressure that must be mounted to our democratic system. I'd like to believe that thanks to our Constitution, we have in place some stress mechanisms that are built into it, starting with Chapter 9 of the Constitution, which lays it bare that there must be institutions that are entrusted to promote our democracy. And one would therefore argue from there that indeed the responsible institutions that are mandated to deal with such issues should play their part and not necessarily rely too much on political positions taken to advance certain interests and preferences at the cost of others.
Jackie, you don't agree?
It's all abstract, you know, and I would like to see all of us coming back to reality. And the reality is that this is just about the power relations between the white monopoly capital and the disempowered multitudes of black people, also because the political elite of the ANC is in cahoots with white monopoly capital. They sleep on the same bed. And that is why we are a disempowered majority, in a sense that democratic values are only enacted only when it suits the interests of the powerful, which is the white minority. Why do we not have people on the street again saying, this is undemocratic, this is unconstitutional? Because when it suits them, they say save SA, and they run their campaigns supposedly in the name of defending this democracy and its constitution. Nothing could be more blatantly undemocratic and unconstitutional in terms of this guaranteed right of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It is more personal, especially for us black people, given the history of apartheid, which also completely silenced. You could not speak. What you say does not matter. What you feel does not matter because of your race. And barely 2 decades after this very liberal bourgeois and in many ways only theoretical freedom, even this symbolic freedom, petty freedom of expression, white monopoly capital wants to take it away. And I'm saying, up until this thing of radical economic transformation and decolonization is really dealt with, this is going to be the behavior of whites who feel very entitled. That's why they continue to call us monkeys.
But you could counter-argue that and then say, MultiChoice saying they've now opened up a space for a South African black-owned company to come and take over the channel. How much more blacker can you be?
And ANN7 is already black-owned. And by the way, let's speak from this standpoint of this bourgeois democracy and its institutions of law, the judiciary. It is a known fact, it is in the public domain, that ANN7 and the New Age were sold by the Gupta family to Mr. Mzwanele Manyi. So this idea, that the pretext by MultiChoice to say, it says explicitly that it is because of its association and the controversies around the Gupta family.
And those that are, we mustn't make, trivialize the matter, that there are some who are rejoicing and saying finally, and they've been vindicated because of the whole controversy around it, that the channel was started on alleged ill gains or illegal activities, and therefore it should be shut down and we start from a clean slate. I'll just take quick reactions, Cecilia and then Siso.
They found no wrongdoing in the creation of ANN7. It was a young startup business owned by the Guptas at that stage, and I think there were other shareholders as well. They found no wrongdoing. They've made a completely arbitrary decision, an entirely arbitrary decision to close it down because they did not take into account the public, public perception. Public perception also needs to be managed at a very, at that level. There were many options they had. Closing down, and not renewing the license was just one of the most arbitrary, wrong decisions that they could possibly have made. Unconstitutional, I think, against, freedom of expression and everything that our panelists have said. But but wrong, absolutely wrong.
Okay, even if there is a new potential buyer or strategic partner that is South African black, there will still be the alternative voice. So this, in this case, because of the whole polarized nature of how things have developed, that it is justified for MultiChoice to then make a clean slate.
Well, a capitalist state is inherently a captured state. So, of course, there will be blacks, and I think they've been lined up already and potentially screened. And I think the one thing about clever white people is they pick their blacks very well, and people that can relate the message, the lack of transformation, and less to democracy and less to transformation. So I do think there might be groups that will avail themselves, and that will be besides the point. The point here is there is a group, there is an organization that is fully black-owned with staff that's about 97% black, young South Africans, and they're shutting them out. And so, you know, that brand is called MultiChoice, but in fact there is no MultiChoice here, perhaps single choice to cut down on people that they perceive as the opposition. There's going to be a judicial commission of inquiry in this country, and all the facts are going to come out. And I don't think South Africans should sort of preempt what people have done, and particularly people that work for this organization. Those people did not capture the state. They are people who went to school to be writers, to be journalists, and they then need to be afforded the opportunity to work in South Africa. So I do also believe that South Africans are going to come out in their numbers, and there's going to be a protest, because this is an assault to democracy. It is an assault to the spirit of Oliver Tambo. It's an assault to the electorate. And I don't think it's going to pass off that quickly, to simply say, well, we're going to take ANC off the air, and then South Africans are just going to willy-nilly accept that. I think we're far away from that. That's not likely to happen at all.
We'll speak to the numbers with Mr. Williams in terms of, and also the value proposition, what the mission statement is for ANC and its objectives as well. I want to come back to worst case scenario, Tsepo, in the sense that we are already on a digital platform. You can stream live, and I'm taking this from a WhatsApp message from Botsangwelo to say divorce is maybe not such a bad thing. I'm not sure if he's being facetious on that part.
No, it's not possible to stream live, as Mr. Botsangwelo is saying, for a very simple reason that the government of this country has failed to create capacity in terms of broadband. So effectively, if somebody is in a village in Ngwavuma or my home village, Semorishi, they will not be able to access ANC because they don't have broadband, and the current 3G or 4G that they have is so expensive, prohibitively expensive, because the same government has failed to reduce and ensure that there is affordability in terms of what effectively has become an essential service. So we are dealing here with the failings of this government that fails to appreciate its constitutional obligations, that fails to appreciate the need to give the people dignity. And at the same time, we are dealing here with effectively a company that in fact has taken advantage and now is abusing its dominant market position. I just don't know what on earth was going on in the minds of those people when they were sitting around the boardroom, and I'm wondering if indeed they were drinking tea in those teacups. Maybe they were drinking something else. For them to have come to this absurd conclusion that somehow they can now talk of sponsoring a news channel upon the demise of ANC. Of course, there is nothing in the Constitution that stops them. They MultiChoice tomorrow, they can establish that channel. They don't have to call anybody. They don't have to do a tender. And if anybody feels that indeed broadcasting is a business that they want to be in and do news content, by all means they can start. But there is nothing constitutionally or lawful that will allow, therefore, for ANC to be cost or to be driven into bankruptcy or to shut down on that basis. And I'm saying that the litigation or the course of action that the owners of ANC need to take is not only around MultiChoice, but is also around the government, and specifically ICASA, as well as the Minister of Communications, who already is uttering absurdities. However, on the other hand, MultiChoice would have done all of us a great favor if they felt that they are uncomfortable about the status which has been bequeathed upon them by the apartheid government, which they enjoy to this state, of being a legalized monopoly in terms of satellite broadcasting, if they were uncomfortable, because they now, under our constitution, are a quasi-organ of state, therefore, because they are offering a constitutional, or they are providing a constitutional right or enabling a constitutional right, they therefore have an obligation to ensure that it lives for all. If they're uncomfortable with that status of being a quasi-organ of state, they were supposed then to relinquish the monopolistic yet legalized satellite broadcasting rights that they have and give them back to the state in order for the state to then be able to carry those rights. So if they are feeling uncomfortable, they must hand back the license as a belief.
All right, Mr. Williams, just in terms of the non-partisan, as we heard what the criteria is for the new black South African-owned players in this space, that can we say with certainty that there aren't nuances or nuanced political views or preference in the media space that would then suggest that ANC7 is more overtly supportive to one party or another?
It's disingenuous, of them to say now they're going to put out a tender for a new, as I said earlier, the difficulty for any new black grouping would be the barriers to entry. For any media, whether you want to go into radio, whether you want to launch a new newspaper, or whether you want to get a new TV channel, it is extremely difficult in terms of capital, in terms of skills, etc., etc. So if you believe that they're serious about opening up for a new black-owned, you will also believe in the tooth fairy. They're not serious. They took a political decision because of the sustained pressure that they've been under from the neoliberal groupings in our country, from political parties like the DA and others, from capital formation and business formations. They've been under sustained pressure and they've taken a political decision. Now, the very important thing now is for the ANC, and I'm not very optimistic about it, but for the ANC to now realize that they will have to now implement the resolutions on media diversity they've now adopted at 3 consecutive conferences of the organization. They have to, otherwise if they allow this thing to happen, if they allow ANN7 to be shut down, they will rue it for the next 20 years. If we look at what media did in the local government elections just over 2 years ago, the one-sided coverage that we've seen across the country, the ANC will rue the day they allowed ANN7 to be shut down.
And Mr. Williams, I hate to break your word, but just in terms of concerns around the white monopoly capital, that being a PR gimmick from Bell Pottinger, creating instability in the country, all of these, of course, can be very closely associated with the Gupta family and that narrative around them, that ANN7 has become a propaganda machine and all sorts of other slurs that were leveled against us. So in your view, what value, or maybe let's start out to what the original vision was for the channel and what value it had contributed so far?
We've had a media in this country since 1994 that really failed in promoting the idea of a developmental state and the idea of progressive politics in our country. And I think the mess that we find ourselves in on a lot of fronts, economic front, etc., you can also lay at the door of a media that is fairly much beholden to big and monopoly capital in our country. So you suddenly work at ANN7, and the channel has started to build up a viewership of people who believe in the kind of journalism that has been practiced by ANN7. Yes, it's a new channel. It's only 5 years old, but slowly it has created for itself a foothold in the market space. And And this rubbish about, Bell Pottinger and that ANC got caught up in the ANC's factionalism, etc., etc. All you have to do is watch the channel for yourself and see that it provides a fresh perspective up against a media that is pretty one-eyed and one-dimensional in its approach.
Former editor-in-chief for The New Age and ANN7, Mr. Mohsin Williams, joining us on the phone line. We thank you very much for your time. Very quickly, Adiel Ntabeleng, Transform RSA president. Where to now? I mean, we're going to have these kind of debates and hopefully also engage our viewers in how they feel about this particular move from MultiChoice. But of course, I think the debate is around creation of new industries and new players.
Look, indeed, the simple solution is people must just cancel DSTV subscription. If we are to be serious in this country in actually teaching big business that the value of particularly black business owners is very important, and for us as black people, we support the subscription of DSTV on the basis that we have DSTV broadcasting rights of ANN7 as a channel. Most people do not come to DSTV because they appreciate the content quality that DSTV offers. It's because of the stations like ANN7 that are on from DSTV. So in this case, we are calling for a national campaign to say people must just black out DSTV, cancel the subscription, cut your subscription cord, cut your cable cord, your satellite cord, and make sure that we start making business feel the pain that we feel as black people, that our businesses are being insulted. Here you have Muzwana Lemani, who is an owner who has just bought an asset for 450 million. And out of his investment is already sabotaged, which means he's going to be left with a massive debt, which will be unable to pay because now they are taking him out of a bouquet basket, which actually gives them access to broadcasting his channel. This is quite undemocratic. This is quite unconstitutional. And it is actually something that is very offensive to us as black people. So we're saying our people must start really showing their real economic power as well as the ability for them to start making sure that we are respected as black voices, as black business owners, and as people that are leading a society which says that we need a democratic society, non-racist and non-racial society. And
all right, Adiel Ntabeleng, Transform RSA president, thank you indeed for your time. And Mr. Pamla, before we let you go, is that the way, the call to make, to say desubscribe or deregister with DSTV if you as a viewer feel strongly that you want to have ANN7 on your platform?
Well, indeed. We look at this and say people have to vote with their wallet. Like we have said, if this is a free market system, then let the viewers decide. For example, we have high unemployment of 64% amongst young people in this country. So those young people, this is a challenge to them to say, for you to be able to be part of this mainstream economy, to be included, you should stop these kind of irrational decisions that are really about pushing more young people into the unemployment line. And to the workers in general, to say, if you look at what is happening at ANN7 and you don't realize that actually this can happen to you in your own sector in future, so you better give ANN7 workers support now, because if we support each other on the picket line, we will meet each other on the unemployment line. So the challenge is for young people to look at this and say, there are young people who are for ANN7, fail to support those young people and lose their job. And workers have to look and say, really prepared to allow this situation to continue. But now to the people of South Africa as to whether are they prepared to actually push back and push back harder? Because for us, from where we stand as an organization that represents workers, we feel very strongly about it and we find it totally unacceptable.
All right, Mr. Pamla, that's his Pamla Kusatu, spokesperson. And on the phone line, we also had Professor Perry Hanyani, political analyst and a professor with the University of the Northwest. We'll take closing comments very briefly in studios. Fiso, we'll start with you in the call now that in the main, if people, they need to exercise their choice and their right on the platform through their wallet.
Well, absolutely. And at the end of the day, MultiChoice is a business and they want viewership. And by removing what the people want, it is an assault in their own business. I don't think they've really considered this entirely. I think they mounted to the pressure, the business pressure and the political pressure. Pressure from the right-wing parties, pressure from a faction of the ruling party, and they had to bow. But if MultiChoice in its own mind had to make this decision, I think they would have considered not to touch ANC7 because they are really going to dent the subscription bouquet, they're really going to dent their pockets. That's something they really didn't consider. But I mean, you know, he who pays the piper picks the tune. This is high-level politics at play. And I think South Africans must awaken themselves and see that this has got nothing to do with ANC7. This is about the challenge that transformation and radical economic transformation presents to white monopoly capital.
And it's also at stake, I mean, is the footprint that ANC7 as a brand has established, including in many countries in Africa, on the rest of the continent. Cecilia, it's not just about the local market as well.
Yes, indeed. We know that we are the channel of choice in Zimbabwe and even in South Africa. Whenever we do stories on Zimbabwe, the people who are living here come to flock to us and think that we provide a useful and interesting platform which gives strong analysis across Africa. And I think that is something that we need to take into account. And I hope that we'll be hearing a multiplicity of voices in protest. It can start, I guess, from here, but a multiplicity across all the communities that we cover. To say ANC7 makes a profound contribution to their lives.
Yeah, but why shouldn't there be a panic though, Jackie and Tutsaipo as well? I had a friend call me who was completely in a tiz saying that, we heard with immediate effect you're going to be shut down. Are you okay, my friend? Should I send a food parcel or something? Because it depends on how the story develops tomorrow. In your view, why should we panic? Why should there be concern?
No, there's no need to panic. This is part of the broader struggle for redefining, reconfiguring power relations in this country. And I must say, I'm completely disappointed in the position, the concluding remarks of Kosatu, because, again, this is where the ANC alliance, when it's time to carry out their mandate, they control workers. The idea of boycotts does not work. I was sent in earlier on, black people inside H&M, which called us monkey less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
This is a political matter that needs political decision. The posture of the Minister of Communications is cowardice, but Luthuli House is full of cowards.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, Jackie, in the interest of time. Rakgadima, you're not getting the last word because we have you on the next debate on the Steinhoff developments in Parliament. We'll take a quick break. Do stay with us, and we appreciate your viewership.
Just count.
What remains of it?